Welcome and thank you for checking out OmegaBalancer.com, a web application that Virtus Nutrition designed to help nutritionists and dairy producers better balance the omega fatty acids in their dairy cow diets. Let's take a look at how this app works. First, there are 3 simple steps. Number 1, you can enter your TMR fatty acid profile if you have already taken a sample and sent that to the lab for fatty acid profile analysis. Or if you have not done that step, you can simply enter your TMR ingredients to get an idea of what your ratios look like. Secondly, you'll be able to see the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio for your dairy diets and how that compares to what we're shooting for. And lastly, we can model the impact with Prequel, omega-6s for the pre-fresh diets, and Strata, omega-3s for early lactating diets. Now let's take a look at this app. This is the home screen, and those simple steps are right on there. And you can either start with entering that fatty acid profile analysis, or entering the TMR ingredients. Lastly, there's also an FAQ that gives you a number of questions that you can walk through to give you background on balancing omega fatty acids. Let's start by taking a look at these entry screens. This is on the TMR ingredients. There will be a couple questions, what type of diet that you have, and how you want to enter that ration information. This is what your ingredient screens looks like. You can either enter all of your ingredients by hitting that green button at the top, or you can enter it by category, by fiber, concentrate, protein, etc. This gives you a look at how those screens look, where you can enter that dry matter pounds of each individual ingredient. If we hop over to TMR fatty acid profile, they'll also want to know what type of diet that you're entering, as well as if Prequel in the pre-fresh or Strata, if it's a lactating diet, is already existing in that diet. This is the entry screen for your fatty acid profile results. These numbers, you'll have your total fatty acid as a percent of dry matter, which will come right off of your analysis, your estimated dry matter intake, and then all of these fatty acids that you see here are listed on that TMR fatty acid profile and what percent of the total fatty acids they make up. So you just enter those and then hit calculate. Now we head over to the results screens. And you can see that your current omega-6 to omega-3 ratio will be the first thing that you'll see, and how that compares to recommended ratios. If you're not feeding Prequel or Strata, you can model out what impact adding a quarter pound will have on improving that ratio. And lastly, we'll take a look at the impacts of rumen biohydrogenation, looking at the fatty acids fed or intake versus the fatty acids absorbed in the small intestine or output. This is the first part of the results, where you can see your ratio as that compares to that optimal ratio. This is a pre-fresh example, so that optimal ratio is 15 omega-6s to 1 omega-3. It's actually the opposite of a lactating diet, where we are shooting for 5 to 1 or less omega-6s to omega-3s. Secondly, we can model out how omega-6s with Prequel will impact your current ratio in this pre-fresh example. Down here at the bottom you can see there's a button where you can hit with Prequel, and it will change that ratio and give you an idea of how much a quarter pound of Prequel will impact that ratio. Now we'll slide down to the bottom of the results page, and this is a nice tutorial on rumen biohydrogenation, looking at the flow of those fatty acids from intake to output. We've got the specific fatty acids over here. We've got the percent of a total fatty acids that each one of those makes up in the diet. The intake grams per day are the actual grams of those specific fatty acids that the cow is eating. This current output are the grams actually absorbed in the small intestine. And then the last one is plus Prequel, showing those output grams absorbed with Prequel included in the diet. And then we also graphed this out with a nice feature where you can toggle the intake, the current output, and plus Prequel. As you can see down there in the key, only 2 of them are highlighted because I touched the plus Prequel one to turn that off. And so this one, specifically looking at intake versus current output, gives you a really good look at that shift of fatty acids. As we see, just a little bit of 18-0 was actually fed in the orange versus the 18-1, 2, and 3 in higher amounts. But by the time they get to the small intestine, there's a significant shift in that 18-0 as these 18-1s, 2s, and 3s that have been unprotected in the rumen have had their bonds broken by the rumen bugs and become stearic acid, or 18-0. And then I'll just show you another example where we toggled the intake off, and now we're just looking at that current output versus the output with Prequel, so that you can see where those increases in specific fatty acids occur. In this case, with Prequel, we're more than doubling the amounts of omega-6s, which significantly shifts that omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Well, that concludes our quick tutorial on OmegaBalancer.com. We appreciate you taking a look at this app and enjoy balancing your omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids.